much for your feedback. The shadow economy, which represents, in my opinion, a huge challenge for modern economic systems. Well, everybody knows that we live today in a very uncertain world. It's sometimes called a VUCA world. VUCA stands, it's an acronym standing for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And if you look around, we can see many factors which confirm this acronym. Well, pandemic, war in the Ukraine, energy crisis, political tensions, geopolitical rivalry between China and US, and many, many other circumstances and factors which are very dangerous for the existing order. One of the important challenges, in my opinion, is the shadow economy, which is present in many countries. I would like to start my lecture with a citation from known economist J.R. Hicks, who once said that capitalist enterprise is a child of evasion. On the long way from ancient smuggler to modern industrialist, the entrepreneurs have learned more tricks than are easily reckoned with. And well, I think that most of us would probably agree with this statement. Well, and maybe just another citations, very famous, particularly the first one, pecunia non olet, money doesn't smell, and pecunia omnia effici possunt, money can get everything in free translation. It's from Cicero. And well, to put it in plain words, money makes the world go round. If you remember the movie, Bob Fosse's movie, Cabaret, Liza Minnelli sang a song in one of the Berlin cabarets just with this title, money, and with this repetition, money makes the world go round, which is, of course, related to the shadow economy also. Well, what about the shadow economy? What is it? What's this phenomenon? What are the definitions of this phenomenon? And here we can encounter a lot of terminological conundrum, or maybe chaos or confusion, which, of course, is a huge challenge for researchers. I myself, I'm engaged in the research on the shadow economy, and my second PhD, which in Polish called habilitation, was dedicated to the shadow economy. And just preparing this lecture, I encountered a paper. We have this paper here, analysis of the concept of informal economy through 102 definitions, legality or necessity. And in this paper, the author analyzed 102 definitions. Well, 102, I'm not making an error, of informal economy. And well, of course, I'm not going into details as far as the methodology is concerned. But anyway, there are many, many definitions, which of course is a big problem for researchers, especially young researchers who try to enter into this research area. So I will try to put it in very, very plain words. What's the common denominator of the shadow economy activities? Well, years ago, I participated in a joint Polish-German research project on shadow economy. And at that time, of course, we were discussing the terminological issues as well. And our definition was really simple, I think. Shadow or informal or unofficial or hidden economy are all forms of unregistered economic activities which are connected with the creation of new value added and or with the redistribution of incomes. That was our definition at that time. By the way, there are a lot of controversies over definitions. As I mentioned a couple of minutes earlier, every researcher practically has its own definition. Well, I would just say that the unofficial or shadow economy is perhaps best described by the activities of agents which operate in the shadow, or as sometimes is called in the gray zone. Yeah, this is where just work done for cash, where taxes are not paid and regulations are not strictly followed or are only partly followed. So this is a part of a segment of the economy involving goods and services which are paid for cash, which are paid for in cash, and therefore are not declared for taxes, which does not leave electronic trail, in other words. There are many definitions, there are many synonyms of the shadow economy. I mentioned here only some of them. There are quite other many colorful definitions or colorful notions. Well, with very interesting adjectives. Second economy, informal economy, unofficial economy, unregistered economy. These are most commonly encountered. Then irregular economy, subterranean economy. The Italians have the notion economia sommersa, which is submerged economy. Moonlight economy. Moonlighting means, work which is not registered to the tax authorities. Clandestine economy, black economy, gray economy, underground economy, unobserved, invisible, dual economy, cash economy, twilight economy, parallel economy. So as you can see, really there are many, many definitions. The most commonly accepted notion here is shadow economy, and I think it's equivalent in more or less with informal economy or an official economy or second economy. Well, in different countries, researchers use their own terms. For example, in Germany, they use the term Ausweichwirtschaft. In France, économie au noir, as I mentioned, in Italy, economia sommersa, in Russia, teniovaya economica, etc. Some authors, as I mentioned before, there are a lot of controversies regarding the shadow economy, and some of the authors, they say that we can subdivide this segment of the economy, I mean, unofficial or shadow economy, into different subsegments. And here, of course, there are also controversies over this subdivision. But one of the authors subdivided this shadow and official economy into three segments. Subsegments: tax-free economic activities, underground economy, which is also subdivided into black labor market and unbilled purchases, which is transactions without an invoice, and do-it-yourself economy. By the way, do-it-yourself economy, or as the Germans call it, Selbstversorgungswirtschaft, does not fit into the notion of the shadow economy. Although there are some authors who would agree with this statement that it's also a part of the shadow economy, but the overwhelming majority of researchers, they say it's not part of the shadow economy. Shadow economy are unregistered activities. There are also a lot of controversies regarding so-called underground economy, because some people understand underground economy, the illegal, criminal segment of economic activities. I will come back to this maybe later. And there are also, I'd like to, since this is the conference dedicated to finance, insurance, etc. So there are two notions which we encounter in the literature: tax avoidance and tax evasion. They are not equivalent, of course, and here you have very simple definitions. Tax avoidance is more or less its substitute for tax optimization. Sometimes we use the term tax optimization, or in extreme cases, aggressive tax optimization, which is it's just, I would say, it's an euphemism, because it's the reduction of the tax base using legal methods. And to this end, the different measures are taken. I'll talk about it a couple of minutes later. And we have the notion of tax evasion. And tax evasion means that their activities is illegal. These are illegal methods to modify an individual's or corporation's financial situation to lower the amount of income tax liability. In other words, to lower their taxable income. And this is penalized in many countries. Well, in Poland, we use two terms, if I remember well. It's, it doesn't matter for the foreign guests, but it's uchylanie się od opodatkowania I unikanie opodatkowania. Okay, but doesn't matter. Anyway, it's tax avoidance and tax evasion. And they are countries and territories which facilitate international tax abuse and private tax evasion. And here you have there is a graph prepared by Statista, which shows us which are the biggest facilitators of global tax abuse. And we have here Cayman Islands, is the major here among the top three, UK and Netherlands, and then Luxembourg, US, Hong Kong, China, British Virgin Islands, Ireland, Singapore, Bermuda, and Switzerland. So these are sometimes called tax havens or tax or offshore financial centers. These are jurisdictions that offer favorable tax or other conditions to its taxpayers, and this, of course, is very eagerly used by those who have a lot of money, starting from big corporations and ending with sport stars and movie stars. What are the reasons of the expansion of the shadow economy? And here I listed here the most commonly reasons encountered in the literature. Well, the first reason is high taxes and social security contributions. When there is the notion, those who are in the field of finance, they know perfectly the so-called tax wedge, in Polish klin podatkowy, which means that the state takes away a part of the generated value added, or profits of the corporations, of individuals. And some people call it, if I remember well, it was Andrew Schleifer who called it the grabbing hand of the state, or the grabbing hand of the fiscal authorities. And there are also some researchers who say that not the nominal tax rates are here the most important, but the unclear regulation or the excessive regulation. And this is, for example, the opinion of Professor Friedrich Schneider, with whom I had the pleasure to cooperate. And he says that this excessive burden of government regulation, it's one of the reasons conducive to the development of shadow economy activities, because people, want, especially entrepreneurs, want to avoid contacts with this bureaucratic machine. Then, poor quality of the tax law. This was mentioned just by me now. Lack of clear, transparent tax law, tax system, and Poland is here the best example. There are many amendments, and the recent tax reform, or so-called tax reform, was the spectacular example of failure to simplify the tax system. Then failure to execute existing regulations, even if we have some regulations which seem reasonable, there is a failure to execute these existing regulations, which is also related to another reason, but it means weak and poorly paid fiscal administration, which is also the case of Poland. Then, last not least, low tax morality and erosion of business ethics. It specifically refers to the post-communist countries, where the burden of the former system, of the heritage of the former system, impacted on the tax behavior of individuals and corporations. Then also important factor is relatively low standards of living, lack of income or modest income of the consumers and households, and related to this also high unemployment rate. Here in red, I just mentioned one of the saying. It was, if I remember well, it was one of the high-level representatives of the Polish Ministry of Finance who said once that there are no honest taxpayers, there are only improperly conducted controls and audits. In other words, find a paragraph, and I will also find the suspect. Yeah. Sometimes it's used this expression in Polish. What are the consequences, implications of the expansion of the shadow economy? Usually the authors, and no wonder, put an emphasis on the negative impact of the shadow economy on overall economic system, on the ethics of economic life, etc. Because why? Because shadow economy generates huge losses for many national budgets due to tax evasion, on the one hand, and due also to the tax avoidance, which creates so-called tax gap. I will mention about tax gap a little bit later. Then shadow economy distorts competition through unfair market practices. And finally, it leads to the erosion of ethical norms and business ethics. It's just low tax, low payment morality. People don't want to pay taxes. People try to evade paying taxes. Some authors, especially those representing neoliberal stance, say that there are some positive sides or some positive aspects of the shadow economy, because it creates new jobs. When there is an unemployment or high unemployment rate in the official sector, people go to the unofficial sector, to the shadow economy. It stimulates market competition, because here you have only market rules of the game. There's no state intervention here, no regulations. So it's really, some people say, it's really here governs the market. And finally, some people indicate that it eases social tensions. It acts as social mollifier, yeah, because people who lose their jobs in the official sector go and get, even if this income is lower in the official sector, still there is some income, and they are able to survive under harsh circumstances of economic crisis. What are the estimates? A few words about the estimates of the shadow economy. Here, of course, well, I don't want to go into details, because I would need probably some 2 hours to explain in a very detailed way how the shadow economy is estimated by different authors. There are also here a lot of controversies, but well, let's start with the point of departure with global estimates of the shadow economy. And the shadow economy is, I mean, in global sense, is estimated by experts to rank as the world's largest economy after the US. So the combined employment in the shadow economy all over the world, it's 1.82 billion people, yeah, out of 8 billion people which we have on our planet, yeah. And shadow economy produces some $10 trillion worth of goods and services, which is approximately 16% of the global GDP. 16% of the global GDP. By the way, if I remember well, Polish contribution to the global GDP is 1%, to give you some idea. And global tax revenues are reduced by at least 2 billion US dollars. And the tax gap ranges from, I mean, tax gap means the difference between taxes which the corporations, individuals should pay to the state, and the taxes really paid. And the tax gap ranges from in different countries from 2% in New Zealand and 13.5% of the GDP in Italy. In some countries, it's like US, it's if I remember well, 3.5%. If you are interested in this, you just look. We wrote a paper with Professor Laczkowski, which was published, "Tax Gap in the Global Economy." It was published in Journal of Money Laundering Control in 2018. So and it's freely available, so you can just try to find some other data regarding the tax gap. Well, maybe a few words how shadow economy is estimated in Poland. And here we have our central statistical office, Główny Urząd Statystyczny, which is best prepared to assess different aspects of economic activity. And according to this his approach of this institution, which is compatible with the EU statistical procedures, the so-called hidden sector represents the production of goods and services which are not prohibited by the law, but which either wholly or partially are hidden for view for state administrative bodies. So the illegal part of the shadow economy is not taken into consideration. This is an important statement. And these unregistered activities, so here we have the notion of unregistered economy, hidden sector, is subdivided into two categories. These are unreported activities in the group of registered enterprises, which includes especially so-called micro-enterprises, which in Poland means these are micro-enterprises employing up to 9 persons. and regardless of the ownership structure, and with those and also with private sector businesses, which so-called well, they are not big corporations anyway, which employ from 10 to 49 people, excluding cooperatives. So this is underreported activities in this group of registered business entities, either very small or relatively small. And secondly, unregistered business activities by private individuals. Private individuals mostly operating in the service sector. Yeah, so there are construction services, for example, private lessons, etc. Polish Central Statistical Office tries to estimate the size of the shadow economy using different methods. One of them is a direct method to assess the scope of informal business activity in registered economic entities, which I mentioned before. And there is also labor market research conducted to assess the extent of unregistered, mainly service-related activities by individuals. And it draws on the following sources of information. These are official statistics of wages and salaries, findings of a representative study of the population. This is also very important. Findings of a representative study of the population's economic activity, active labor force participation. It's in Polish BAL, Badania Aktywności Ekonomicznej Ludności, and special modular study of unregistered unemployment. Which is published, the results of these studies were published in different years. And well, what are the results of these estimates? And here, of course, we have divergent values. Well, Polish Central Statistical Office estimates are relatively low, I would say. In my opinion, we are evidently underestimated. I mean, the shadow economy is evidently underestimated, because in the years 2010 to 15, where official estimates range from 12 to 14.5% of the GDP, while the recent estimate, goose estimate for 2020 was 10.4%, which is in my opinion an evident underestimation. Professor Schneider, highest estimates, whom, as I mentioned before, I had the pleasure to cooperate, and who is a renowned scholar who published a lot of papers and books on shadow economy. His highest estimate was more than 22% of Polish GDP, which is, in my opinion, much more closer to the reality. And finally, IPAC estimates. IPAC stands for Instytut Prognoz i Analiz Ekonomicznych, which publishes every year its reports on shadow economy, and their estimates were here. And we can see that there is a growing trend in the recent years, starting from 2020. In 2020, their estimation was 18%, then 18.3 in 2021, 2022, 18.9, and 2023, the estimate for this year is, of course, it's a rough estimate, it's 19.6%, which is close to 20%. And well, there are different factors here. Yeah, I mean the pandemic, the implications of a pandemic, then economic uncertainty, etc. So people engage in the formal economy. Well, here to give you some broader context, the estimations of Professor Schneider, they are from 2017, but I deliberately took these figures because they have very nice structure, and there is a differentiation between countries with highest different regions of the world, firstly, and secondly, with highest and lowest shadow economies. And here we can see that the biggest shadow economies, these data for different years, yes, but the biggest shadow economies are in the sub-Saharan African countries and Latin American countries, no doubt about it. While the lowest are in the OECD countries, yeah. Here we can see it's from 17 more or less to 2021 in OECD countries. Well, and it's because these data are for different years, yeah. For different periods, yeah, there is a decreasing tendency all over the world, yeah. Maybe with the exclusion of South of South Asia. And here we have size of the shadow economy as a measure, as a percentage of the GDP of the 15 countries with the highest shadow economy. Yeah. So what are the countries in which the shadow economy is highest and it represents more than 50% of the official GDP? So we have Georgia, the data for 2017, but you know, they have not changed so much, I think. Then around 65%. Then we have Bolivia, more than 60%. The same refers to Zimbabwe. And these are top 3 countries. Yeah. Then we have also Nigeria, Guatemala, while the average is in these countries more than 50. So it's really a big problem for those countries. These are underdeveloped countries, and they need desperately taxes to finance social programs, to finance infrastructure projects, etc. Yeah, so there's a huge problem for them. And if we add here the tax gap resulting from the operations of big corporations, so we have the whole picture. And let's have a look at the shadow economy in countries which have the lowest share of the shadow economy as a percentage of the GDP. And here, well, on the average, it's 12.16%. In Poland, the estimation of Prof. Schneider was for 22.2. I'll show it on the next graph. So, well, here the lowest share. The lowest countries are with the lowest share are Switzerland, US, Austria, around 9%. Although here with Austria and Switzerland, in other study, the figures are even lower, probably because the different method we used. Probably the so-called dynamic method was modified, the so-called currency demand approach, but I don't want to go into details because it's, you know, maybe it would be too complex. Anyway, there are huge differences here. Yeah? So because here in the countries with the lowest share, we have well, around 9% and around 16%. And here's also the estimation of Professor Schneider's size of the shadow economy measured as a percentage of the GDP in 23 European countries. And here we have Poland, yeah, with 22.2. The biggest share of the shadow economy was in Bulgaria, Turkey. Bulgaria 29.6, Turkey 27.2. Then Croatia, Romania, Estonia, Lithuania. It's about around 20, 26, 25. Yeah. While the lowest share, well, on the average it was 17. Yeah. And which countries have the lowest share? Switzerland, Austria, Luxembourg, Netherlands, UK, Ireland, Germany, Denmark, Finland, Sweden. Scandinavian countries, you know, they are known for very transparency of the public life. So they usually have in the Transparency International Corruption Index, they have also very nice scores. Well, these are the estimates. Just I wanted to present them to you just to provide a more comprehensive picture. And I would like to focus briefly on the, I call it byproducts or unwanted products of the economic transformation in Poland, because, you know, the economic transformation in Poland and in other post-socialist countries generated new economic order. So the old economic system collapsed. Yeah, so-called command economy collapsed, or state socialism. You know, there are different notions. Anyway, the old system collapsed. There was a period of so-called systemic vacuum, yeah, or period of interregnum. We could use this Latin word, where the system, the old system collapsed, and there were no new rules. So in this particular period was the atrophy of social norms, the moral erosion, we could say. So the principle catch as catch can probably was a major imperative for many economic agents. And there were also many privatization pathologies in post-communist countries, specifically in countries like Russia, but not only, also in the Ukraine, but also it happened in Poland and in other countries as well, like asset looting, asset stripping, cherry picking, shady or wildcat privatization, property right enfranchisement of politicians, bureaucrats, and insiders who use their access to power to enter into business. There were fake bankruptcies, there were so-called runaway capitalists, which transferred their assets to foreign banks and offshore havens. Russia is a spectacular example with the emerging of oligarchs who amassed enormous fortunes, which were then, in many cases, transferred abroad. And the so-called fly-by-night companies or ghost companies as well. Other byproducts which also triggered off the emergence of new forms of shadow economy are siphoning of state-owned assets into private businesses, undervaluating privatized property, corruption, starting from large-scale corruption to so-called creeping corruption or small corruption or petty corruption, embezzlement of public money, informal lobbying and rent-seeking, commercialization of political power and access to information, illicit arbitrage, insider trading of the capital market, etc. When swindling insurance companies of indemnity and authorities of sickness pay, unemployment benefits, disability pensions, counterfeiting, brand piracy, where perpetrators agency operate in this segment of the shadow economy, do not pay royalties under intellectual property and copyright and patent legislation, and swindling the last not least very important issue, swindling the treasury of value-added tax refunds, large-scale VAT extortion, which resulted in a huge tax gap also in Poland. And then narrowing this tax gap was the major challenge for the successive Polish governments. Well, if we look at the people in undeclared employment, these are official statistical data, but I would be skeptical about the relevance of this data, because these data show that these are successive, there were this special modular study dedicated to unregistered labor, which was performed in these years, and it shows that the employment in the shadow economy is decreasing, but in 2017 it increased. And then we don't know how it was in the successive years. Specifically, we don't know what happened in the pandemic. And also remember that we have many people from Ukraine who many of them are registered in the official sector, but also a part of them probably work in the unofficial sector. So I would be skeptical about this data. Anyway, I present you because they are officially published. Why Poles take undeclared work? No, here I think the reasons are quite obvious. Well, because they cannot find regular job, problems in finding employment in the official sector, insufficient income, so they just wanted to make both ends meet. They try to earn additional money. Employer offers higher pay without registration. Then the fact itself of registration is discouraging some people. They don't want to go to cope with these formalities, so they just want to go work and cash in hand. Yeah. Then huge social insurance contributions, then personal situation, family or personal situation, usually related to low income, and resentment of regular work with one employee because some people want to try to find another work. What are the functions of the shadow economy? I mentioned one of them earlier, namely social modifier, because some people say that the existence of the second economy eases tensions and social discontent. Professor Judith Tendler from Massachusetts Institute of Technology coined a term, the devil's deal. This term, the devil's deal, Diabelski Pact in Polish, was depicting the reality of Latin American countries where governments pretend not to see, not to notice the shadow economy activities because the unofficial sector or shadow economy, or in many cases underground economy or criminal economy, substitute the states in providing income for poor people. So, you know, they just, and it eases, in this way, it eases social discontent. It eases social tensions. But there are also other functions of the shadow economy, because it acts as an economic buffer, a kind of shock absorber of the turmoils, tensions, and frictions in the official economy. And there is also the notion of economic lubricant. Shadow economy facilitates the functioning of the economy at large, also the official sector, because it makes it more competitive, more market-driven. As I mentioned at the beginning of my lecture, shadow economy is a market-driven enclave. Here, no state regulation, can oppress the economic agents, can hinder the economic activity. So now the obvious question would be, okay, we have this phenomenon, which is a huge challenge for the state authorities, for the society at large. What to do with it? How to fight with the shadow? It's sometimes, I would call it's dancing with the shadow. Fighting shadow economy is like dancing with a shadow. And here we have different possible options. Well, proper, less complicated tax system. It's one of our major recommendations. Then reducing the tax burden, reducing the tax burden, the tax wedge, etc., and tax rates, removal of bureaucratic barriers to economic growth. So just reducing these barriers, to launch new private businesses, adequate income policy, fostering entrepreneurship at business startups. It's related to the removal of bureaucratic barriers to economic growth. Then proper control mechanisms, trust but verify, trust but verify. So especially under the realities of post-communist countries where business ethics still, is not does not represent proper standards. And last not least, education campaigns dedicated to developing and promoting tax morality, which is also a very important issue. I will maybe come back to this at the end of my lecture. So what's the role of the state when in fighting the shadow economy? There are three scenarios here, three possible scenarios, although probably the other authors would design maybe another scenarios as well. Well, first one is the so-called invisible hand of the state. I mean, this is classical neoliberal perspective. State acts as an agent which supports market rules, does not interfere with individuals' entrepreneurship, individuals' creativity. So it's only, the role of the state is to provide a proper institutional framework, good tax law, etc. Then we have another scenario, which is a grabbing hand of the state, with high tax burden, with bureaucracy, over-regulation, corruption, and the state acts as an oppressive actor, as a mythical Leviathan. Leviathan was this monster. And the most taxpayer-friendly scenario would be helping hand of the state, where the state operates a helpful citizen and taxpayer-friendly actor supporting entrepreneurship and innovation. Well, in many cases, unfortunately, this is wishful thinking, because, of course, there are some we can encounter this helping hand, for example, in the Scandinavian countries, but in many other countries, also in Poland, it remains only wishful thinking. Well, there are a lot of. I'm just looking. I still have some time. Let's have a look at the measures. How to reduce the tax gap and restrict the shadow economy in Poland, which were taken recently. Just very briefly, because we are under pressure of the time. Recently, the Polish government, one of the tasks was to reduce the so-called tax gap, which was really very, very big due to this VAT extortion. by criminal organizations. So there was the establishment of so-called Krajowa Administracja Skarbowa, which is National Revenue Administration, which was a new consolidated state agency headed by Deputy Minister of Finance with proper institutional framework with 16 regional revenue administrative offices, 400 tax offices, 16 customs and tax control offices. So, you know, a really powerful organization. Its basic objectives include introducing new methodology and procedures for customs and tax controls in areas of increased VAT fraud risk, launching analytical tools for big data processing, coordinating analytical and control operations at the central and regional levels, and launching a system to monitor and transport of goods, so-called SEND system, which has contributed to improving tax collection and curbing fiscal fraud. Then another measure was so-called online fiscalization. So the remote monitoring of sales would bring down the numbers on the spot transactions. So to this end, the so-called central repository of retail sales has been created. What was the result? By the end of 2021, the implementation of the central repository of retail sales data project produced an increase in VAT receipts, an estimated 122 million zloty, which around more or less 40 million euro. Maybe it's not that much, but still it's something. Then another measures were standard audit file tax for tax, which also, well, I would say, it's a sort of data warehouse for all transactions subject to VAT. Yeah. Companies are required to send VAT records on a monthly basis, so the state has analytical basis to control the activities of economic engines, and to provide, and this provides a very good tool to reduce the shadow economy. And the launch of this SAFT has helped to close loopholes in the Polish tax system. And with these transactions centrally registered, it's now much more easier to fight economic fraud. And then another measure was the introduction of reverse charge mechanism, which has been adopted also in many other countries. And the implementation of this reverse charge mechanisms was one of the major important steps to reduce the shadow economy. Other measures, just very briefly: monitoring cargo transport, displacing cash, and shopping receipt lottery. Here you have when displacing cash, I refer here to the amount of to the increased amount of transactions which are subject to reporting. Earlier it was 1,500 euro. Now it's 3,500 euro in Poland. Well, so just I'll be coming to an end, but still I have something to say. Well, when searching proper policy mix, what would be the proper policy mix? Should we focus on permissiveness, or should we take a more rigorous stance? And here I mentioned this devil's deal. So there is of course this discrete charm of permissiveness, yeah, but still there is the danger of devil's deal, yeah. So the state pretends that it doesn't notice the shadow economy activities. But, you know, I don't think it's a good solution. Well, on the other hand, we have very rigorous stance, like China's corruption crusade, or in Italy they've created a financial police called Guardia di Finanza. I know the reality of Italy quite well because I studied there. Anyway, it doesn't produce required results. The same was the case in China. You know, this China's corruption crusade resulted in a very unexpected result in a very unexpected, spectacular case, because the biggest bribe in China ever registered was taken by the vice chairman of the Anti-Corruption Commission. So that means that the rigorous stance probably doesn't work. Well, so seeking the most adequate solution, the most desirable option seems to be, in my opinion, a diversified, very flexible, country-specific approach using a carefully designed combination of tough measures and soft measures. Tough measures means control mechanisms, punishment, and soft measures like educational campaigns, etc. So probably this combination would be the best option. And I remember when I participated a couple of times in a Cambridge Symposium on Economic Crime, and in one of the symposium, I sat by the table with representatives of Internal Revenue Service, American financial police, so to say, which is very, very effective in fighting tax evasion. And he said to me that they try to implement stick and carrot policy. And in their opinions, it's the best way to reduce tax evasion. So probably stick and carrot policy would be the best combination also in Poland, because we don't have this tax morality like in the Scandinavian countries, which have very high nominal tax rate, and still they pay taxes. And well, here maybe I have the citation from Al Capone, and sorry for quoting a mobster who ended up in jail behind bars, but he said once that you can get much further with a good word and a gun than with a good word alone. So probably under the specific reality circumstances of Central and East European countries, there will be the more productive approach, more effective approach would be to use harsh measures with educational campaigns. Well, economic crime is becoming a global challenge for modern economic systems, and in the recent reports of PricewaterhouseCoopers, this booming underground economy, it's sometimes called, a little bit ironically, as GCP, gross criminal product. It means human trafficking, drug trafficking, sex business, smuggling, illegal import or export of toxic substances, waste, etc. And the combined revenue is estimated to be around $1,000 billion, which is a huge amount of money. So the global economic crime rate is quite impressive, because 46% in the Pricewaterhouse survey experience some form of economic crime. And here different countries are affected, both developed and emerging countries, and company detection methods are not keeping pace. And now what's important, cybercrime is on the rise, because cybercrime becomes one of the most important and most lucrative also segment of economic crime. It's cyber money laundering and using blockchain technology to fraudulent activities. And there was a significant increase in tax activity in the tax sector since 2020. Generally, there was a slight decrease, but as in the cybercrime, there was this increase. So, and nearly 2/3 of companies operating in the tech sector, so the technology, media, and telecommunication sector, experience some form of economic fraud. So, how to combat economic crime and corruption? Well, of course, here the importance of high-level expertise is of crucial significance, and global standards, because the economic crime, doesn't know borders, so including corruption. It generates demand for, of course, this danger generates demand for specialized expertise and skills regarding global standards and requirements, which we don't have, jurisdictional regulations and obligations. Then the global regulatory ecosystem. We don't have this. Well, of course, there is a rising importance of so-called RegTechs, regulation technologies, which is very important. customer due diligence, technical expertise in transaction monitoring, data analytics. Here again, regulation technologies, again supported by AI algorithms, can be very helpful. Okay, so probably we should try to somehow to regulate it, but regulate doesn't mean over-regulate. Please bear in mind this quote, corruptissima re publica plurime leges, which means in free translation, when the republic is at its most corrupt, the laws are most numerous. So to cut the long story short, to put it in plain words, there is a real danger of overregulation, which produces undesired results. So, of course, professional expertise and good standards are badly needed, but it doesn't make sense, in my opinion, to pass hastily new laws on corruption, legislative inflation, this legislative bubble. In my opinion, is counterproductive because it creates only the illusion of the omnipotent ruler or planner. Yeah. So much more reasonable option should rely on the implementation of good standards, practices, and norms on the micro level, which would strengthen the moral texture of a social economic life and prevent the erosion of business ethics. So there was this famous Hamlets Dilemma, to be or not to be. Well, the taxpayer dilemma is to pay or not to pay. This is the question, yes? Of course, there only one reasonable recommendation would be we should pay taxes, of course, but because, as Benjamin Franklin once put it, and in this uncertain world, nothing is certain but death and taxes. Yeah. So thank you for your attention. If you happen to have some comments or questions, you are welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.